"There's no time, do it now." The young Apache woman yelled, and the rancher did the unthinkable. He took a deep breath of the dry, warm air and surveyed the land that had been his life for decades. Endless stretches of desert, dotted with low shrubs and hardy cacti, stretched as far as the eye could see. His ranch, though humble compared to the vast wilderness surrounding it, was his pride and joy. Every corner of it told a story, stories of long days, hard work, and quiet victories. On this particular morning, the rancher moved through his daily routine as he always did. He checked on the fences, ensuring that the cattle were safe and the gates were secure. The horses neighed softly in the distance, greeting him as he approached. He had known each of his animals for years, almost like family, and he cared for them with the patience and dedication that only someone who lived closely with the land could understand. As he worked, he noticed something unusual. A faint sound, almost like a call carried by the wind, drifted across the open desert. At first, he thought it was just the wind playing tricks, whistling through the canyon-like formations of rock and scrub. But the sound persisted, growing stronger with each passing moment. It was a voice, a human voice, shouting something urgent, though he could not make out the words. Curiosity stirred in him, and he paused, shading his eyes against the rising sun. He scanned the horizon, squinting at the distant ridges and valleys, searching for the source. Then he saw her, a figure moving swiftly across the scrubland, her steps hurried, purposeful. It was a young woman, her hair dark and tangled from the journey, her face streaked with dust and sweat. Her clothes, simple yet worn from travel, clung to her frame, and her eyes held a fierce determination that immediately caught his attention. The rancher instinctively knew that this was no ordinary traveler. There was a sense of urgency in the way she moved, in the way she shouted. He could see the worry etched into her features, a worry so intense it seemed almost tangible. Without thinking too much, he left the fence he had been repairing and moved toward her, calling out to get her attention. As he approached, the young woman stopped abruptly, turning to face him. Her eyes met his, wide and filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. "There's no time," she shouted, her voice carrying over the dry air. "Do it now." Her words were short, almost breathless, as if every second mattered. The rancher frowned, unsure what she meant, but the intensity of her tone sent a jolt through him. He held his hands up, signaling for her to slow down. "Wait a minute," he said calmly, trying to understand. "Slow down. Who are you and what's going on?" The young woman took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but her urgency did not fade. "My people, the settlement, it's in danger," she said, her voice urgent and trembling slightly. "The waters are coming. If we don't act fast, everything will be lost." The rancher's eyebrows shot up in surprise. A flood? In the desert? It seemed impossible, yet there was something in her eyes, something beyond words that made him pause. He had lived in these lands for decades and had seen many things, but he had never encountered a situation that demanded such immediate action from someone so young. "Slow down and tell me everything," he said, his voice firm but calm. "I need to understand what's happening before we do anything." She nodded quickly, and the words poured out of her in a rush. She described the signs she had noticed during her journey, the dark clouds gathering far off in the distance, the unusual dryness of the riverbeds, the sound of water rushing through hidden channels. Her voice was steady now, precise, filled with the knowledge of someone who had grown up observing the land and reading its subtle warnings. She told him about the settlement, a small group of families who lived along a narrow valley, unaware of the approaching danger. Every word she spoke painted a vivid picture of the looming disaster. The rancher listened intently, his mind racing. He was a man of caution, someone who preferred planning and preparation to impulsive action. Yet, as he looked into her eyes, he realized that this was not a situation where caution would serve anyone. The desperation in her voice, the urgency of her warning, left him with no choice but to consider immediate action. He glanced back toward his cabin, thinking about the resources he had, his workers, his trucks, the horses, and the supplies stored for emergencies. It would not be easy to mobilize everything quickly, but he knew that waiting could cost lives. The young woman was right. There was no time. Finally, after a moment of thought, he nodded. "All right," he said, his voice steady, carrying the weight of decision. "We'll do it. Show me the way and we'll move quickly." The young woman's face softened for a brief moment, relief mingling with her ongoing urgency. She turned and began to lead him across the rugged landscape, pointing out paths and obstacles, guiding him with knowledge of terrain that he did not possess. The rancher followed, trusting her instinctively, feeling a strange sense of respect for this young woman who had appeared out of nowhere and commanded action with nothing but words and determination. As they moved together, the rancher observed her carefully. She was small, but there was a strength in her posture and a confidence in her movements that belied her years. Every step she took seemed purposeful, every glance calculated. She knew the land intimately, and he realized that he was in the hands of someone who could make the impossible possible. The journey was not easy. They had to navigate through rocky ridges, thick brush, and uneven ground. At times, the rancher struggled to keep up, but she never faltered, never looked back with doubt. She pushed him forward, her voice a constant guide. "Hurry, faster, we can't waste another minute." Along the way, he began to understand more about her. She was brave, resourceful, and unafraid of challenges that would have intimidated many adults. And yet, beneath her strength, there was a vulnerability, an awareness of the stakes, a knowledge that the lives of many depended on their actions. That combination of courage and responsibility struck a chord with the rancher, making him feel both admiration and a sense of shared purpose. By the time they reached the edge of the first valley, he could see the signs she had described. The clouds were darker now, the wind picking up in intensity, and a distant rumble hinted at the movement of water he could not yet see. It was real. The danger was real. The urgency that had filled her voice from the start was justified, and he felt a rush of adrenaline mixed with determination. For the first time that morning, the rancher allowed himself to set aside doubt and hesitation. The young Apache woman had arrived at the right moment, and her warning had sparked a decision that could change the course of events. He felt the weight of responsibility, but also a growing confidence that together they could face whatever lay ahead. As they paused briefly to catch their breath, she turned to him once more. "We don't have time to stop," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "Every second counts. Trust me and keep moving." The rancher nodded. He did trust her. And in that moment, he realized something important. Sometimes, life demands that ordinary people do extraordinary things, and courage often comes not from preparation, but from the willingness to act when it is needed most. With a final glance at the horizon, he adjusted his hat, took a deep breath, and stepped forward. Together, they began the journey toward the unknown, bound by urgency, courage, and the unspoken, understanding that the next hours could determine the fate of many lives. And as the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the desert, the rancher felt a strange mix of fear and hope, fear of what was coming, and hope that he could rise to meet it. The rancher and the young Apache woman moved quickly through the desert, the ground dry and cracked beneath their boots. The sun climbed higher, warming the air and casting long, shifting shadows across the uneven terrain. Every step seemed to carry them closer to the danger she had warned about, and yet the full extent of the threat was still unclear. The rancher's mind raced as he tried to grasp what exactly they were facing. A flood in the desert seemed impossible, yet her intensity left no room for doubt. As they walked, the young woman spoke in short, precise sentences, her voice calm but insistent. She pointed to distant clouds, thick and gray, gathering beyond the mountains. "See those clouds," she said. "They are moving faster than usual. The rains will pour suddenly, and the dry riverbeds will fill in minutes. The settlement lies in the lowest part of the valley. If we don't act now, there will be no time to warn them." The rancher squinted at the horizon, trying to estimate the distance. His experience had taught him that the desert was unpredictable, but even he could feel that her words carried truth. She spoke with the authority of someone who had spent her life reading the land, noticing subtle signs that others often missed. He could see the urgency in her eyes. There was no exaggeration, only a clear and present danger that demanded immediate action. "How far is this settlement?" he asked, his voice steady but tense. "About 10 miles, she replied without hesitation. "It may not seem far, but the roads are rough and time is short. We must warn them before the waters rise. Every second counts." The rancher nodded, understanding that hesitation could cost lives. He began to think through what needed to be done. His ranch had resources, horses, trucks, supplies, and a few trusted workers, but mobilizing them quickly would be no small task. He thought about the families in the settlement, probably unaware of what was coming, and a deep sense of responsibility settled over him. He could not ignore this warning, even if the danger seemed impossible. "We'll need to act fast," he said, his mind racing through possibilities. "I have workers back at the ranch. We can gather some trucks and horses and bring supplies if needed. Can you lead me to the settlement safely?" She nodded again. "Yes, I know the paths that are safest. Some of the trails are hidden and rough, but we can make it if we keep moving. We cannot wait for everyone else to decide. There is no time for that." The rancher took a deep breath and made a quick decision. "All right. I'll go back, gather the others, and meet you here as quickly as I can. Meanwhile, you keep moving. I'll be right behind." She hesitated for a moment, as if unsure whether to trust him to move fast enough, then gave a small nod. "Hurry, please hurry," she said. Then she disappeared into the uneven terrain, moving swiftly across the ridges and scrub, leaving the rancher with a mix of concern and determination. He turned and ran toward his cabin, feeling a strange rush of adrenaline. His heart pounded, not just from the effort but from the gravity of the situation. There was no room for doubt, no time for second-guessing. He shouted for his workers as he ran, explaining the situation in urgent, clipped sentences. Some of them looked skeptical, but the urgency in his voice and the seriousness of his expression left no room for argument. Within minutes, they were loading trucks, saddling horses, and gathering supplies: water, food, ropes, first aid kits, and tools that might be needed. The rancher moved like a man possessed, knowing that each second that passed could make a difference between safety and disaster. His workers, though initially hesitant, soon followed his lead, their own concern growing as they realized the seriousness of the situation. Meanwhile, the young Apache woman continued ahead, guiding the way through rough terrain that the rancher's trucks could not easily navigate. She moved with confidence, pointing out obstacles, warning of narrow passes, and calling out directions to make sure no time was wasted. Her knowledge of the land was remarkable. She knew where the loose rocks could cause a fall, which paths could hold vehicles, and where shortcuts could save precious minutes. By the time the rancher returned with his team and trucks, she had already reached a small clearing near a dry riverbed. The clouds were closer now, darker, moving faster than the sun. The wind carried a faint, distant sound, almost like the rushing of water through a hidden canyon. It was subtle, but enough to send a shiver down the rancher's spine. He realized that her warning had been entirely accurate. The danger was real, and the time for hesitation had long passed. The young woman didn't waste a moment. She began directing the rancher and his team, pointing to the paths they needed to take and the hazards to avoid. "Take the left ridge first," she instructed. "The riverbed there will fill quickly if we are delayed. Keep your speed steady, but don't stop." The rancher followed her directions, feeling a growing admiration for her courage and knowledge. He had been a man used to relying on his own experience, Yet here was someone, younger than him, guiding the way with a calm authority that left no room for doubt. He realized that in moments like these, wisdom sometimes came from the least expected sources. As they moved, the young woman explained more about the settlement and its people. Families had lived there for generations, relying on the riverbeds for water and grazing land for their animals. They were hardworking, humble, and unsuspecting of the approaching danger. Some of the settlers had children, some elderly, and all of them were at risk if the floodwaters arrived before they could be warned. The rancher felt a heavy weight in his chest, a mix of fear for the people's safety and determination to do everything possible to protect them. They reached a narrow valley where the terrain became more challenging. Loose rocks and deep sand slowed their progress, but the young woman remained a steady guide, her voice sharp with urgency. "We cannot stop," she said. "The water will rise fast. Keep moving, but carefully." The rancher directed his workers to follow her guidance. They had to carefully maneuver trucks over uneven ground, while horses and smaller vehicles moved along safer paths. Every decision had to be quick and precise, yet calculated to avoid mistakes that could cost valuable time or endanger lives. By now, the rancher was fully aware of how much this moment depended on immediate action. He had spent his life managing a ranch, facing challenges of droughts, storms, and wild animals, but nothing had prepared him for a situation like this, where the lives of an entire settlement hung in the balance. He realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. As the minutes passed, the clouds grew darker, and the wind carried the faint but unmistakable sound of rushing water through the distant canyons. The rancher knew that they were running out of time. He looked at the young woman, noticing how calm she remained, how her focus never wavered. Her determination inspired him, giving him the strength to push forward, even as the terrain grew more difficult and the threat more immediate. "How much farther?" he asked, panting slightly, trying to catch his breath while keeping pace. "Not far," she replied. "We will see the settlement soon, but we must not slow down. Every second counts." They continued through the rugged landscape, the sense of urgency growing with each passing moment. The rancher felt a mixture of fear, determination, and hope. Fear for what might happen if they failed, determination to act quickly and decisively, and hope that their combined efforts could save the people in the settlement. Finally, the outline of the settlement appeared in the distance. Small homes clustered together, smoke rising from chimneys, livestock grazing peacefully, completely unaware of the danger approaching. The rancher's heart raced. He realized how close they had come, and how much depended on the actions they would take in the next moments. The young woman pointed to the settlement, her eyes sharp and urgent. "There," she said. "We must move fast. Warn them before it's too late. I will help guide the families and protect the animals. You take the trucks and make sure the supplies reach them safely." The rancher nodded, fully committed now. He understood that hesitation could cost lives, and he felt a deep respect for the young woman who had brought him to this moment. Together, they would face the threat, and together, they could make a difference. With determination burning in his chest, the rancher moved forward, his team following closely behind. The young Apache woman led the way, fearless and focused, as they approached the settlement. Every second counted, and every decision mattered. The storm was coming, and the floodwaters would not wait. But the rancher had chosen to act, and for the first time he felt the true meaning of courage, taking action when it was needed most, guided by wisdom, trust, and urgency. The sun had climbed higher in the sky, and the desert heat pressed down on the rancher and his team as they followed the young Apache woman across the rugged terrain. The path to the settlement was far from easy. Loose rocks and sandy stretches made the horses stumble and the truck slow down. Every movement demanded focus, every step required attention. The rancher could feel sweat running down his back, his hat soaked, but he did not stop. The urgency in the young woman's eyes reminded him why he could not. They had traveled miles across valleys and ridges, the desert stretching endlessly around them. The young woman led confidently, her feet moving almost silently across the rough ground. She seemed to know every rock, every dip in the land, and every narrow path that could save them precious minutes. The rancher, experienced with the land, marveled at her knowledge. She had grown up here, he realized, learning lessons from the earth itself, lessons that most adults, even himself, could easily overlook. "Watch your step here," she warned, pointing to a narrow ridge with loose stones. "A wrong move and someone could fall." "We cannot afford that now." The rancher nodded, signaling his team to slow and carefully maneuver. He felt a growing sense of respect and admiration for her. She was small in stature, but every movement radiated strength and precision. Her calm focus reassured them, and despite the rising tension, it gave them a sense of hope. As they continued, the first signs of the approaching flood became visible. Far in the distance, the riverbeds they had crossed earlier were beginning to fill with muddy water. The rumble of rushing currents carried faintly on the wind, and the rancher realized that the young woman had been right. The water was moving faster than anyone could have imagined. The stakes were real, and there was no turning back. Suddenly, the path ahead narrowed into a steep canyon. Loose rocks tumbled underfoot, and the truck struggled to maintain traction. The rancher jumped down to guide the first vehicle carefully, his hands gripping the edges of rocks, helping the driver avoid slipping. The young woman moved ahead, scouting the safest route, her eyes scanning every detail with sharp precision. "This way," she called, pointing to a narrow side path that twisted up the canyon. "It is tricky, but it is safer. Follow closely and don't rush." The rancher led his team along the new path, feeling his heart pound. Each moment felt critical. One wrong move could cause an accident, or worse, delay them enough for the flood to reach the settlement. Yet the young woman's confidence was unwavering, and it bolstered their courage. They climbed higher, the wind picking up as dark clouds rolled over the mountains. The rancher could see flashes of sunlight reflected on distant waves of water forming in dry riverbeds. He realized that time was slipping through their fingers like grains of sand. The young woman turned to him briefly, her eyes calm but urgent. "We are close," she said, "but the worst is yet to come. We must move fast once we reach the settlement. The water will not wait." As they crested the canyon, they encountered their first major obstacle. A fallen tree blocked the narrow path ahead, its massive branches tangled with rocks and brush. The trucks could not pass, and the horses balked at the blockage. The rancher felt a moment of panic. Every second lost here could be critical. "Help me clear this," he called to his team. Together, they lifted branches and moved rocks as quickly as possible. The young woman joined them, her small hands surprisingly strong, pulling debris aside and guiding them on how to remove the heavier pieces safely. Despite her youth, she worked with authority and determination, showing a practical wisdom that impressed the rancher even more. Once the path was cleared, they continued, but the terrain became even more treacherous. Loose rocks, steep drops, and patches of quicksand tested every ounce of their skill. The rancher's mind raced, calculating each movement, directing the drivers and riders, and coordinating with the young woman who seemed to know instinctively which paths would hold and which would fail. At one point, a horse slipped on a loose slope. The young woman reacted instantly, grabbing the reins and steadying the animal before it could fall. The rancher and his workers helped as well, securing both horse and rider. He realized then that her knowledge was not just about the land, but about life itself. She understood danger in ways he could not have imagined. As they moved forward, the wind carried a stronger scent of rain and mud. The clouds overhead had darkened further, heavy with water that was soon to fall. The rancher's heart raced. He knew that the settlement was close, but every challenge along the way tested their patience, skill, and courage. Still, the young woman never wavered, never complained, never doubted. Her focus was absolute, her sense of responsibility unwavering. Finally, they reached a high vantage point that overlooked the settlement. The rancher gasped as he saw the valley below. Small homes dotted the landscape, and families were still outside, unaware of the approaching danger. In the distance, muddy water had begun to surge through the dry riverbeds, moving faster than he had imagined. The young woman's eyes scanned the scene, and she pointed to areas where people and animals were most at risk. "There," she said, pointing to a cluster of homes near the river. "We must start there. Warn them first. Help the animals. Time is short." The rancher nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. His team readied the trucks and horses, preparing to descend into the valley. The young woman led the way, moving swiftly but carefully down the path she had chosen. The rancher followed, his pulse quickened, every sense alert. As they approached the first homes, the rancher called out to the settlers, alerting them to the danger. Some ran to gather their children, while others tried to secure animals or belongings. The young woman moved with them, guiding families to safety and giving instructions with calm authority. The rancher directed his team to help wherever needed, moving supplies, clearing paths, and assisting with animals. The floodwaters were approaching faster now, the sound of rushing water growing louder in the valley. The young woman's voice cut through the noise, sharp and clear. "Hurry, move quickly, we don't have time to waste." The rancher marveled at her courage and clarity under pressure. Even in the face of danger, she remained composed, directing action with precision. Her presence inspired everyone around her, giving them confidence and focus when panic could have easily taken over. Together, they worked to evacuate families and animals. Horses were guided to higher ground, children were carried by hand when needed, and the trucks delivered essential supplies to those in the most vulnerable homes. The rancher felt a deep sense of purpose, realizing that every action he took now could save lives. He also recognized that this young woman had led him to this moment, showing him the power of knowledge, courage, and quick action. As the floodwaters began to reach the edges of the valley, the rancher and his team had successfully moved most families and animals to safety. The young woman continued to move from home to home, ensuring that no one was left behind. The rancher noticed how calm she remained, even as the danger grew closer, and he felt a profound respect for her strength and determination. By now, the valley was partially flooded, muddy water swirling around the edges of homes and fields. The rancher felt a surge of relief. Despite the challenges and obstacles along the way, they had managed to protect the majority of the settlement. The young woman's guidance had been crucial, her knowledge of the land and quick thinking saving precious minutes and countless lives. As they regrouped on higher ground, the rancher looked at the young woman, gratitude and admiration in his eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "Without your guidance, we would never have made it this far." She smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting both relief and resolve. "We did what we had to do," she said simply. "There is still work to be done, but we saved them this time." "That is what matters." The rancher nodded, feeling a deep respect for her courage, wisdom, and composure. He realized that sometimes, leadership and bravery do not come from age or experience alone, but from determination, knowledge, and the willingness to act when others hesitate. As the floodwaters continued to rise in the valley below, the rancher and his team worked alongside the young woman, ensuring that everyone and everything was as safe as possible. Together, they faced the challenges, overcame obstacles, and demonstrated the extraordinary power of human courage and cooperation in the face of danger. The rancher and his team, guided by the young Apache woman, descended into the settlement as quickly as the terrain would allow. The valley was alive with movement and confusion. Families were rushing, trying to gather children, pets, and belongings. The sky had darkened further, and the first drops of rain began to fall, tiny at first, but growing heavier with every passing moment. The distant rumble of the floodwaters was no longer faint. It was a roar that shook the air and echoed off the canyon walls. The young woman's voice cut through the chaos, sharp, clear, and commanding. "Hurry, get the children, bring the animals. Move them to higher ground." Her presence brought a sense of order to the panic. Her eyes scanned the area constantly, noting the direction of the rising water and identifying the families who needed the most immediate help. The rancher and his team quickly jumped into action. Trucks were unloaded with blankets, food, and water. Horses were ready to carry those who could not move quickly on foot. The rancher felt his heart pound as he moved from family to family, helping children onto horses and guiding adults to safer ground. He realized that every second mattered and that hesitation could cost lives. In the midst of this, he noticed a small child trapped on a porch, too frightened to move. The floodwater was beginning to swirl around the edges of the structure. Without thinking, the rancher sprinted forward, carefully stepping over slippery stones, and scooped the child into his arms. The little one clung tightly, crying but safe in his grasp. The young woman was already nearby, directing a group of people carrying animals to higher ground. "Over here," she shouted. "Use the trucks to carry those who cannot walk." The rancher directed his team, helping people climb into the back of the vehicles. Horses were led along steeper paths, carrying children and elderly alike. The air was thick with tension, the sound of rushing water and panicked voices blending into a chaotic symphony. Yet, amid this chaos, there was also determination, teamwork, and courage. The floodwaters surged faster now, creeping over the edges of the valley and washing away anything in their path. One of the family's small barns collapsed under the pressure, sending animals scrambling in all directions. The rancher ran toward the largest group of livestock, shouting and clapping to guide them into temporary enclosures on higher ground. The young woman joined him, helping to herd the frightened animals while reassuring the families that everything possible was being done to protect them. The rancher noticed an elderly man struggling to carry a bundle of blankets and food. He rushed over to assist, taking the load and helping him reach safety. Every action felt critical. Every choice mattered. And through it all, the young Apache woman moved with a calm authority, never losing focus, always thinking several steps ahead. Rain fell harder now, soaking everyone in moments, making the rocks slippery and the paths treacherous. The young woman did not slow, and neither did the rancher or his team. The settlement was alive with movement, families following directions, animals being led to safety, and everyone working together to face the threat. The rancher realized that courage was contagious. Her determination inspired the settlers and his team alike, creating a unity that made even the impossible feel achievable. As they continued, they reached a cluster of homes closest to the rising riverbed. The water had already begun to flood the lower yards, swirling around fences and threatening the foundations of buildings. The young woman assessed the situation quickly. "We need to move fast. Take the children first, then the elderly, then the animals. There isn't time to save everything else." The rancher followed her lead, carrying a small boy who had slipped and hurt his ankle. The child clung tightly, sobbing, but the rancher's steady voice and calm reassurance eased his fear. "You're safe now." "We're going to higher ground," he said, moving carefully but quickly. The young woman was just ahead, guiding a group of families up a winding path that would take them to a hill above the flood. They reached a small clearing where the ground was slightly higher. Families huddled together, wet and shaken, but alive. The rancher handed blankets to those who needed them and checked on everyone to make sure no one was missing. The young woman moved between the groups, ensuring that all animals were accounted for and that everyone had reached safety. Her calm, steady presence reassured the terrified families, giving them confidence and hope when fear had almost taken over. The floodwaters surged even higher, rushing through the streets and fields of the settlement. The rancher watched as the young woman guided the last of the children to safety, her movements precise and confident. Then, noticing a small dog trapped on a porch, she sprang into action. Without hesitation, she crossed the swirling water, grabbed the frightened animal, and returned to safety. The rancher felt a mixture of awe and gratitude. Her courage was extraordinary, and her sense of responsibility seemed limitless. The rancher then helped a family whose livestock had been separated. They worked together, calling the animals and guiding them through the rising water to a fenced area on higher ground. Every action was a delicate balance of speed and care. One wrong move could have led to disaster, but the young woman's guidance and the rancher's experience ensured that every decision was calculated and safe. By now, the floodwaters had reached most of the lower valley. Homes that had been untouched only moments before were now partially submerged. The rancher and his team worked tirelessly, helping families evacuate, herding animals, and ensuring that no one was left behind. The young woman's leadership had made all the difference, her knowledge of the land and her ability to act decisively under pressure proving invaluable. As they paused for a brief moment on higher ground, the rancher looked around at the families he had helped save. Children clung to parents, elderly people huddled together, and animals were safely penned. Everyone was wet, tired, and shaken, but alive. He realized that the young Apache woman had not only guided them through physical obstacles, but had also given them hope and courage when they needed it most. "Thank you," the rancher said quietly to her. "We couldn't have done this without you." She smiled faintly, brushing wet hair from her face. "We did what we had to do," she replied simply. "There is still work to do, but the people and animals are safe now. That is what matters." The rain continued to fall, soaking the valley and turning the earth to mud. The floodwaters roared past, but the settlement itself was largely safe, thanks to the swift action of the rancher, his team, and the young Apache woman. Families began to settle temporarily on higher ground, grateful for their lives and for the help they had received. The rancher moved among the families, checking on everyone, handing out food and water, and offering reassurance. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment and purpose. For decades, he had lived a life of routine, managing his ranch and caring for his animals, but nothing had compared to this moment. Nothing had felt as urgent, as meaningful, as saving lives in real time. The young woman moved quietly among the people, ensuring that everyone had a place to rest and that no one had been overlooked. She spoke to them softly but firmly, offering comfort and direction. Her bravery and calm had been contagious, inspiring not only the rancher and his team, but the settlers themselves to act with courage and cooperation. As the floodwaters slowly began to recede, the rancher and the young woman stood together, watching the valley below. The danger was not completely over, but the immediate threat had passed. Families were safe, animals were secure, and the settlement had survived what could have been a devastating disaster. The rancher looked at the young woman, admiration and gratitude in his eyes. "You were incredible," he said. "I don't know how you do it." She shrugged slightly, a small smile on her face. "I've learned to pay attention to the land," she said simply, "and to act when it is needed. That is all. We did what had to be done." The rancher realized that this moment, this experience, had changed him. He had witnessed courage, wisdom, and leadership in someone so young, and it had inspired him to see the world differently. He had learned that bravery comes in many forms, and that ordinary people can perform extraordinary deeds when they act with determination and purpose. Together, they helped the last few families move to safety, checked on the animals one final time, and ensured that everyone had what they needed. The storm continued, but they were ready. The rancher felt a sense of peace amidst the chaos, a knowledge that, Despite the danger and the challenges, they had done everything possible to save lives. And as the sun began to break through the clouds, casting golden light over the flooded valley, the rancher knew that this day, this experience would stay with him forever. He had witnessed courage, quick thinking, and humanity at its best, and he had been lucky enough to be part of it. The young Apache woman had guided them, inspired them, and taught them the true meaning of action, responsibility, and hope. The storm finally began to ease, leaving the valley drenched and muddy, but with a strange sense of calm in the air. The rain had stopped falling in sheets, replaced by gentle drizzles that tapped softly against the tents, homes, and trees. The floodwaters had begun to recede, leaving behind traces of their power, mud, debris, and scattered belongings, but the settlement itself had largely survived. Families, though exhausted, were safe. Animals had been secured, and the worst of the disaster had passed. The rancher stood on a small hill overlooking the valley, his boots sinking slightly into the soft, wet earth. He looked around at the aftermath with a mixture of relief, gratitude, and awe. The landscape bore the marks of the flood, yet it was clear that the quick actions of the young Apache woman himself and his team had prevented what could have been total destruction. He felt a sense of deep respect for her wisdom, courage, and calm under pressure. Without her guidance, many lives could have been lost. The young woman moved among the families, quietly checking to make sure everyone had what they needed. She carried blankets, helped lift children onto higher ground, and comforted those who were shaken by the events. Her calm presence brought reassurance to the settlement, showing the true power of leadership in moments of crisis. The rancher watched her, realizing that her courage was not loud or flashy. It was steady, consistent, and unwavering. It was the kind of bravery that saved lives. Families began to gather together, sharing what little possessions they could salvage and helping one another recover. The rancher moved among them, offering assistance wherever needed. He helped rebuild small fences that had been washed away, guided livestock back to safer areas, and handed out water and blankets to those who were cold and wet. He had spent his life managing a ranch, facing daily challenges and hardships, but nothing had prepared him for the sense of urgency and responsibility he felt during this disaster. The young Apache woman approached him, her clothes' damp hair clinging to her face but her eyes calm and steady. "The worst is over," she said. "The people are safe and the animals are secure. That is what matters." The rancher nodded, a deep sense of gratitude filling him. "I can't thank you enough," he said. "Your knowledge, your courage, your ability to act, without you, I don't know what would have happened." She smiled faintly. "We all have the ability to act," she said. "Sometimes we just need to recognize the moment and step forward. That is all." As the day continued, the community began to regroup. Neighbors helped each other clean up debris, rebuild damaged areas, and check on animals that had been frightened or separated during the flood. The rancher noticed the strength and resilience of the people around him. They had faced a sudden, life-threatening event, yet they had worked together, guided by the young woman and his team, to protect one another. It was a testament to the power of cooperation and human courage. The rancher took a moment to walk through the valley, observing the marks left by the flood. Muddy footprints, scattered belongings, and flattened vegetation told the story of the water's force. Yet amid the destruction, he also saw hope. Children reunited with parents, animals safe in fenced areas, and families huddled together with relief on their faces. He realized that disasters, no matter how powerful, could be faced and overcome when people acted with courage and determination. He thought back to the moment he had first met the young Apache woman. She had appeared suddenly, with urgency in her voice and fire in her eyes, and had guided him into action. He had been hesitant at first, unsure whether to trust someone so young with such responsibility. Yet her knowledge and bravery had proven invaluable, and he now understood the lesson she had taught him without words. Sometimes, action must come before hesitation, and trust must be given when it is most needed. The rancher's thoughts turned to his own life and the lessons he had learned through the years. He had always been cautious, preferring careful planning and slow, deliberate action. But today had shown him that there are moments in life where speed, courage, and instinct are more important than caution. He had acted, guided by the young woman's wisdom, and had helped save lives. The experience left him with a new sense of confidence and understanding. As the floodwaters continued to recede, families began to assess the damage to their homes and belongings. Some had lost small personal items, but nothing compared to what could have been lost. The rancher moved among them, offering reassurance and practical help. He repaired fences, helped clear debris, and assisted in moving livestock to safer areas. The community worked together, inspired by the young woman's leadership and the courage shown by the rancher and his team. The young woman moved quietly among the people, giving advice, encouragement, and support. She showed them how to secure their homes against future floods, how to herd their animals to safety, and how to work together in times of crisis. Her calm, confident presence continued to inspire everyone around her. The rancher noticed that her leadership was not about showing off or taking credit. It was about doing what was necessary, quietly and effectively, to protect others. As the sun began to set, casting golden light over the valley, the rancher and the young woman stood together on a small hill, watching the community below. Families were beginning to relax, sharing food and helping one another rebuild. The floodwaters had caused damage, but life was returning to a sense of normalcy. The rancher felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Today, he had witnessed courage, wisdom, and humanity at its best. The young woman looked at him and spoke softly, almost as if reflecting on the day herself. "You acted quickly, and you did not hesitate. That made a difference. Sometimes, ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they step forward at the right moment." The rancher nodded, feeling the truth of her words. He had always thought of himself as an ordinary man, living a simple life on his ranch. But today had shown him that ordinary people could rise to extraordinary challenges when guided by courage, knowledge, and determination. He had acted, and in doing so, he had helped save lives. The experience had changed him, opening his eyes to new possibilities and to the power of taking decisive action when it was needed most. The young woman looked around one last time at the valley, ensuring that everyone was safe and that nothing had been overlooked. Her work was almost done. She had given guidance, saved lives, and inspired a community to act together. She had shown the rancher, his team, and the settlers what courage truly meant. The rancher felt a mixture of gratitude, respect, and admiration. "You've taught me a lot today," he said. "Not just about the land or the flood, but about courage, leadership, and action." She smiled faintly. "We all learn from one another," she said. "Today we acted together. That is what matters." As the day drew to a close, the rancher and the young woman watched the sun sink behind the distant mountains. The valley was quiet now, filled with the gentle sounds of families regrouping, animals settling, and the soft trickle of water returning to the riverbeds. The rancher felt a deep sense of peace and accomplishment. He realized that this day, this extraordinary event, would stay with him forever. He had witnessed bravery and wisdom in someone so young, and it had inspired him to see the world differently. He had learned that hesitation can sometimes cost more than action, and that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary deeds when they rise to the occasion. The young woman turned to him, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "It is time for me to go," she said softly. "My people need me, but remember what you have learned today: courage, action, and trust in the right moment." The rancher nodded, feeling both sadness and gratitude. He had come to rely on her guidance, and he knew that the settlement owed its survival to her bravery and knowledge. Yet he also understood that her work was never about recognition. It was about doing what was necessary, quietly and effectively, to protect others. As she walked away, disappearing into the horizon, the rancher reflected on the lessons he had learned. Life is unpredictable, and danger can appear suddenly. Courage, wisdom, and decisive action can make all the difference. Today had shown him that ordinary people, working together with focus and determination, can overcome even the most daunting challenges. The rancher turned back to the settlement, seeing families smiling again, children playing cautiously, and animals grazing safely. The flood had caused damage, but it had also revealed the strength and resilience of the people. He felt a profound sense of connection, not just to the land but to the community, to the young woman who had guided them, and to the courage within himself. He knew that this experience would remain with him forever. The lessons of the day, about urgency, trust, courage, and action, would guide him in every decision he made in the future. And as the stars began to appear in the clear night sky, the rancher felt a quiet sense of peace. They had faced the storm, acted with bravery, and emerged stronger for it. For the first time in a long while, he smiled, not just because the immediate danger had passed, but because he had witnessed something extraordinary. The power of human courage, cooperation, and determination in the face of life's unexpected challenges. And he knew, without a doubt, that the lessons of this day would stay with him forever.